After we make all the cuts, remove the working template, and the next stage is at the holes where we drove the screws in to hold it in place, we take a 3/4 inch to 7/8 inch drill bit. You take and drill a recessed hole with a 3/4 to 7/8 inch diameter hole, halfway deep. And then you just take a regular drill bit and you drill a through hole. Now you have to make two of these. You make the one for the dovetail working template, and then this one is for the pin working template. Now that you have machined your working templates, you add to that a 1.5 inch by 10 inch clamp board with your hardware to assemble a working jig. Now you need to make two of these jigs, one for use for dovetail boards and one for the pin boards. Again, the instructions will show you the simple steps, and it really is easy to do. Now that you've cut your pin working template, what you do is you take your backer board assembly that we've made and you draw a line 1/4 inch from this front edge, 1/4 inch back. Then you take and align the valley of each one of the cuts so that it is right on that line as you go all the way across. This is your first pass, and if everything is correct, then you should never have to adjust it. But what you will do is you will make one dovetail joint to test the fit. If the dovetail joint is too tight, which means you need a narrower pin, what you do is you move your working template down or this forward so that you have less of this area. Because what you're actually doing when you cut out is you cut away everything except this little triangle of material that you see right here. So again, if your dovetail is too tight, you would move this down, which then means the base is a little less than it was before. That will loosen up the joint. If the joint is too loose, then you do just the opposite. You move this forward so that there is more of this triangle exposed, and that will make the pin slightly wider, which will then tighten up the joint. Unlike other systems available on the market, this is the one and only adjustment that you have to make. Once you lock it in place with those two screws, you never need to readjust this jig again. Now I'd like to introduce you to another way of using the DoveTail TemplateMaster. The jig that I showed you how to use previously was actually the second generation of jigs that I came up with, but its big advantage is it can be used anywhere from things like drawers and small boxes to very small boxes, and that's the benefit of being able to use a router table. Again, if you want, you can use a handheld router, so it's a very versatile jig. But if there's a case where you want to make something like a blanket chest, which is large, or say a dresser or desk, and you want some very large pieces, you actually want something wider and bigger, and it's somewhat difficult to do. So let me show you how to make the first and the second jig that I developed with the DoveTail TemplateMaster. So let's get started. I'll show you how to do that. The way you do this one is it's essentially the same as I've shown you before, except instead of a 7 by 8 inch piece of wood that we used the last time, now it's 7 by 10. And the reason for the 10 inches is you want to be able to have a place to be able to clamp it to when you do your routing. What you do is you screw the TemplateMaster to your blank. Then you drill starter holes, which are really a clearance for your dovetail bit to be able to go into, or excuse me, your pattern bit to insert into. And I'll go into details a little later, but it's very important to drill the holes not only for clearance, but also if you want to make variable spacing. It's a lot easier to do at this stage than it is later. So after you've cut your starters, you do exactly the same thing. You insert your pattern bit so that your bearing rubs on the TemplateMaster, and then you go around each one of these and you make wooden versions of the DoveTail TemplateMaster. Now you have basically reproductions, and as you cut it around the outside, you will see that these all fit together, and you have reproductions, and you can make as many as you want. This example is where I have 2. You could have 4, 8, 30, whatever you want, whatever the combination is, whatever the size it is. All you do is you take and screw these working templates, which are now slightly different in shape, to a backer board, which is 3 pieces of 3/4 inch wood, to give you the mass that you need, because when you're doing wider boards, the boards have a tendency to cup and bow, and you need some rigidity to be able to clamp them straight again to be able to make the cuts. So This is used for, like I said, very long boards, very wide boards, and thicker boards. It's quite easy to use that way, and I'll show you how to make a cut with it in just a second. One of the advantages of this type of an approach is if you want to make a 2-inch spacing, all you do is you make a template with every other one of the blocks cut out, as you see right here on the pin side. So what happened is when we made the blank, we only drilled every other, instead of every starter hole, we drilled every other starter hole, and that gave us a 2-inch spacing for the dovetails. And then when we made the pin section of the gauge, all we did was make what you saw right here, and then I came in with a saw, and I cut each one of these, every other one off, till you get a double spacing. And then when you do that, you now have a 2-inch spacing. If you want 3-inch, you do the same thing. If you want 1 and 3 inches or 1 and 2 inches or any combination that you want, you just make the jig up. And this is very important for things such as a blanket chest, which may be 24 inches in length. If you actually put 1-inch spacings, you get so many dovetails it gets very busy. So one of the things you want to do is to make this 2-inch spacing. It's more aesthetically pleasing, it looks more handmade, and it's very easy to reproduce with these jigs. And now I'd like to demonstrate to you how you use one of these. It's just as simple as use, and like I said, it's big advantages for bigger, thicker, longer boards. The larger jig is just as easy to use as the jigs that I showed you earlier. Procedure is exactly the same. You take your board, you find the center, I provided you a center finder. You move this left or right until you get the same number on both sides. Then all you do is make a mark on the center, which we will then use to put the dovetail jig in place. After you find the center of the board, then you just put it in a clamp it in place, and then we take and install the jig, and we line it up exactly like we did before. We take and align that center marking that we made in the center, eyeballed into one of the joints that we see. Make sure that we have just about the same evenness on both, the same on both sides. Then, in this case, you clamp the jig to the board instead of the board to the jig. You can see where this makes it easier to do if you have rather large pieces. And this is really only for a handheld router operation. After the jig is mounted to the board, I take and put one business card down so that the end joint is one business card proud of the surface. Put the pin board on top of that. By the way, always unplug your router before you do your adjustments. Then you bring it in and you adjust your depth of cut to where it just touches. There we go. Just touches this backer board, just like you see here. Now we have the depth of cut set correctly. Again, there's no measurements. Very easy to do. You insert your router into one of the openings. You make a cut. Now this is where patience pays off. So when you make the cut, you bring it back, you let the router come to a complete stop before you remove it and insert it into the second one. Let me show you right here. Let it come to a complete stop, pick it up, index it over into the second one. Let it come to a stop, repeat it as you go down. After cutting the dovetail joints, we need to change to the pattern bit to cut the pins. So always make sure when you adjust your router to unplug your router. And now we'll take and change the bit. Now we need to mark the pin board to show the orientation for the jig for when we cut the pins. Do exactly the same thing as we've done in the past. We align the tail board up with the pin board. Then we take a pencil and we mark one or more openings. And then we'll use that triangle that we've marked in there to align the jig, just as we've done before.